As I encounter people with Asperger syndrome, typically it's online, but sometimes one-on-one in person, I'm noticing that there is this consistent, persistent dilemma that virtually every Aspie faces. That is that they're really uncomfortable and find challenges working within the neurotypical community. That's basically the core definition, by the way, of Asperger syndrome or autism, that inability to function socially. We just don't get it. We just don't understand. Well, I've come together with some simple, what I call survival strategies. I've got 4 of these for people with Asperger syndrome, and I find that these help me when I am trying to maneuver through life. And, I've been doing this nearly 70 years now. Almost 7 decades, and I've learned a thing or two, and some of these principles do work fairly well. And number 1 is don't expect neurotypical people to change. There's, nearly 8 billion people on the planet right now, and expecting all of them to change their attitude about people with Asperger syndrome and with autism, that's not going to happen overnight or ever. It's just not going to happen. And expecting it to happen, expecting everyone suddenly to understand us, is just misleading ourselves to a point of disappointment. It's just not going to happen. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to get people to understand what we're up against. That is obviously a very noble thing. Do as much as we can, but to convince 8 billion people, I say convinced, educate 8 billion people, and then you got to stop and consider that. So what if we did? Even if that were possible to persuade 8 billion people, or to educate them, I should say, about autism, then, each generation you got to start over. Every time there's a new baby born, you got to start over educating. In other words, we're up against nature. I guess that's what I'm saying. So the behavior of neurotypical people is just natural. They reject us because nature has pre-programmed them, I believe, to reject certain types of people. Those of us who live in the uncanny valley. Just like people with Asperger syndrome and autism are facing challenges, we have neurology that is given to us, assigned to us by nature. We can't change. That's the way we are. Neurotypical people can't change. That's the way they are. So we have to, first of all, come to that. And this is what's really helped me, is come to grip, I should say, the reality that neurotypical people aren't going to change for the same reason I'm not going to change, and that is because we can't change. This is the way that we are. So with that in place, we discard all those should statements. People should do this, and people should not do this, and people should be kinder, and people should be more understanding, and they should. But they're not. And we have to understand that we don't live in a should world. We live in a real world. So that takes us to number 2. And number 2 is we need to be patient with and understanding with, or understanding of, neurotypicals. Now, as I was, making preparation for this presentation, as soon as I wrote that, I thought, I'm going to get some blowback on this one, because I understand, because we've gone through life. Most people with Asperger syndrome have gone through life almost from day one being bullied by neurotypicals. And now here I am saying, be patient with these people. Got to be understanding with these people. Be understanding, be patient. They're mean. I mean, they have been brutal in hurting me throughout all my life. And some people with Asperger syndrome, particularly their childhood and their teenage years, it was very difficult, very challenging. But just like we expect neurotypical people to understand us and have a little bit of patience with us, because you got to admit there are some people out there with Asperger syndrome who are a little bit annoying, right? Not all of us, but there are some. But at the same token, we need to understand that people who are neurotypical didn't ask to be that way. Now, I'm not saying that some of those things they do, like bullying, are good or excusable, but they're just a reality. And we need to understand and come to terms with the fact that that's just the way it is. And getting upset about it is not going to change it. Now, one-to-one, we can do something. And if somebody is extremely abusive, then you get the authorities involved, especially if it is physical abuse. So there are laws in place to protect us in these more severe circumstances. But still, we need to understand they are the way they are because that's the way they were configured, if you will, by nature. So we crave understanding. We want everyone to understand us the way that we are so that we can get along better in the world. But for some reason, we don't want to understand the way they are. And the reason is, I said this earlier, but the reason is we don't want to understand is because a lot of these people, neurotypical people, are just flat out mean. I mean, they're bullies. They hurt us, and they hurt us a lot. And we have this long memory of being bullied throughout our life. Let me just reiterate one more time. I don't mean to keep saying the same thing over and over, but I'm not excusing bullying. I'm not saying it's right. What I'm saying is we just need to face reality. This is the way these people are. And our should statements or should not statements are not going to change them. So we need to learn new strategies in dealing with them because changing them is not one of those strategies. I mean, talking about 8 billion people, it's not going to happen. Number 3 is this. Don't expect you to change. Autism, I would say, is a neurological pathway. People say that it's a disorder. I prefer to say it is an order. It is a disorder relative to neurotypical people. Well, if that be true, then being neurotypical is a disorder relative to people with Asperger syndrome, to people with autism. So what is a disorder? It's something that's not ordered like something else. But basically, they're orders. The way that our brains are configured, neurological pathways. So we need to understand, and this is something that's helped me tremendously, is this is not going away. This is not going to change. So what I need to do is not try to make myself not autistic or make myself not have Asperger syndrome. But what I need to do is identify those areas that are changeable, that will help me adapt better in a real world. And again, the real world is not going away either. So, we have to face the reality that these are circumstances that we're going to deal with for the rest of our lives. And we can make the best of them. Sometimes we, feel sorry for ourselves and poor little me, and some of that, by the way, is justified, the way that we've been treated. I get it totally. But other times we take it to the extreme and we just get frustrated and give up. Can't do that. That's, giving up's not an option. Walking away is just not an option. So that takes us to number 4. Number 4 is this. We need to consider changing some of our strategies. Well, how do we get that done? Well, let me ask you this question. Supposing that you had a ton of bricks and you needed to move them. How are you going to move them? Well, you could get your big old truck and you could load up the big old truck and hopefully you got something that, some kind of a mechanism that will load the bricks onto the truck and you put them on the truck and then you move the truck and then you unload the truck. That would be the best solution in my humble opinion, but what if you don't have a truck? What if all you have is a wheelbarrow? Well, you're going to make a lot of trips. I don't know how far you're going with your bricks, but you can load up your wheelbarrow, get some exercise. You don't use up gasoline now. You're going to burn some calories. And that's where you can get that. That's one way you can get that job done. Okay, what if you don't have a wheelbarrow? Well, you still got a ton of bricks. You got to move those. So how are you going to do that? One-on-one? I mean, it may take forever, but you may have to move one brick at a time. I mean, I got small hands. That's one brick's all I can pick up. Some guys pick up several. They load them up or whatever, but we got a job to do, and we need to figure out how we can do it with the tools we have available for us. All right, so we as people with Asperger syndrome have a job to do, and we need to come up with a strategy. How are we going to move this ton of bricks? Well, it depends on what is available to us. Do we have a truck? Do we have a wheelbarrow? Do we have a bare hands? But we can get the job done. There is some way somehow that we can do this. And so what we do is we understand that we have these, call them peculiarities, these traits of Asperger syndrome, and that's what we have to work with. And as we're dealing with a real world, a neurotypical world, we have various tools that are available to us to work with them. And by and large, as we mentioned earlier, they're not going to work with us. I mean, there's a few that are close to us and understand or have studied this, but we're talking about a tiny percentage of a tiny percentage. So we're the ones who are going to have to do the accommodating. We're going to have to figure out how to move those bricks. That is to say, how we are going to function in a world that to us is dysfunctional. We just have to learn some strategies. Now, this is important, I think, particularly for people with Asperger syndrome who have family members who are neurotypical. For example, maybe your wife, probably if you're married, you have children. Maybe you have siblings, brothers and sisters who are not autistic, not on the spectrum. These are all neurotypical people. Maybe if you are blessed to have a job, then there are neurotypical people you're going to have to work with, you have to deal with. So throughout life, wherever you go, there they are. But particularly close-knit families, there are some neurotypical people that it is worth taking the effort, particularly if you're married, taking the effort to make some subtle changes, because what you are doing is you're trying to meet these people halfway because they understand, or hopefully they understand you. I was going to say they understand you, but maybe they don't. But I would think in most cases, if you are married, for example, to a neurotypical person, at some point in time in your married life, they figured out this is not the person that I courted or I was engaged to or I dated a few years ago. This is who is this person? You know, I don't recognize him or I don't recognize her. Well, here we are. This is the real us. Now, how are we going to deal with this? And what we have to understand, this is real important. What we have to understand is our spouse. And again, we may be talking about parents or siblings or whatever, but our spouse in particular is now a little bit confused because they married what they thought was a neurotypical person. And they didn't even know the term neurotypical. They just, the way that we acted before we got married, that's what they thought they were getting. So they find out they're getting somebody very different. That's not by design. That's just, when you're dating people, you put your best foot forward, and after you get married, you kind of let your hair down, so to speak. Okay, this is the real me. And they sometimes are disappointed, but that's something that I think it is incumbent upon us as people with Asperger syndrome to take the lead in and to accommodate them the best we can. And obviously the first thing is to make sure they know this is who we are. So if you've not yet, say you're a person with Asperger syndrome and you've not yet gone to counseling, you've not had them evaluate you, maybe it's time to get that done and take your spouse with you. Maybe it's time to expose your spouse, past time, to expose your spouse to a lot of the resources that are on the internet so that they know what they're dealing with. But number one, above everything else, when dealing with family members, people who are close to you, is don't use Asperger syndrome or autism as an excuse for bad behavior. Because, I know there are certain behavior traits that are innate to Asperger syndrome, but I also know that we're not robots. I also know that we have free wills, that we can change our behavior, particularly when it comes to communication. So it may not be easy to have a good conversation with your wife, it may not be, or husband, and it may not be easy to avoid meltdowns altogether. In fact, it's probably outright impossible to do that. But you can put forth an effort, right? I mean, is there anybody here who says, no, it's impossible, I can't put forth an effort? The fact of the matter is, when we are dealing with people who are neurotypical, sometimes we need to understand this is my problem. It's my problem, not theirs. And my problem is I don't pay attention. I don't listen. So how am I going to fix my problem? Well, how hard is that? I mean, every time your wife starts making noise, or your husband starts making noise, stop and pay attention. I'm talking about, communicating, not just making noise, but, making noise with their mouth. And as long as they're talking, keep listening. I suppose there may be some extreme cases where you may have a spouse who will never stop talking if you do that. But outside of that, we need to change our strategies because, and, people you're married with, they need to change a little bit too. Siblings, maybe they change a little bit too and so forth. But by and large, it is incumbent upon us. It is our obligation, I believe, that we take the lead in this and we make whatever subtle changes that we can make to come up with this relationship with whomever we're living with to be more functional, to be more enjoyable, to make life just a more pleasant thing to experience. On your screen, there are 2 rectangles. If you like what you hear, you want to hear some more, just click one of those 2 rectangles and we'll keep our conversation going. But if not, well, thanks for stopping by, and we will see you all next time.